It's time to chat about all the books I read in the month of May. In May, I only read 4 books. I'm still just reading pretty slow right now, just taking it easy on the reading life. And unfortunately, it was a lot of flops. I read a lot of buzzy books this month. I was feeling the FOMO. I wanted to be in the moment of reading these books. And unfortunately, they didn't go so great. But I'm going to tell you about them anyway. We're going to go in order from my least favorite to my most favorite. Unfortunately, my least favorite book was The Caretaker by Marcus Kluwer, which is unfortunate for various reasons. One being, this is the second book from this author, and I loved the first book I read from this author, We Used to Live Here. That was a 5-star for me. I just thought it was so creepy and unique and immersive, and it just made me feel that same kind of paranoia feeling while reading that the character was feeling of not knowing what was real and not knowing she could trust her perception of reality. And I just thought it was a really effective horror book. So I was very much looking forward to his follow-up. Also, I was co-hosting Gabby's book club this month for this book. So there is a discussion on Gabby's channel where me, Gabby, and Kayla all discussed this book. So I'm not going to go into too much detail here because there is a whole hour-long video where you can hear all of my thoughts, all of their thoughts, and listen to us discuss this in depth. What the story follows is this woman named Macy who is taking on this kind of strange job as a caretaker for a weekend at this house in the middle of nowhere. That's pretty much all you need to know going into the book. It doesn't reveal too much more. There's a little bit of a surprise kind of early on in the story, but the whole concept is you're just following her over this weekend as weird things are happening. I thought that sounded great, especially because I loved the first book from this author. It sounded like it was going to exist in kind of a similar universe, which I thought would be fun. But I just really did not like anything about this book. I really struggled my way through it. I was not having a good time. I didn't like the writing style. I didn't like the characters. I didn't like the pacing. I didn't like the story structure, and I didn't like the tone. So that's pretty much everything that makes this book what it is, was not what I enjoyed. I gave it a 1.5-star rating, which is very, very low for me. I very rarely give out 1 stars. I just gave it the extra 0.5 for what it's like trying to do and like the metaphor that this book is trying to present, which I think is an interesting concept and could have been really cool. But for me, the surface level story just was not enjoyable. So it didn't make me interested to dive into the story, under the story, and appreciate like what it was doing. It just wasn't very effective for me. I've read a ton of other horror stories that I think do that really successfully, that tell kind of the surface level story, but it's really about something deeper, and it's so interesting and compelling, and it makes me want to dig and dig, and I love the writing, and it's just so immersive, and it creates this atmosphere, and this did none of that for me. While I wanted this book to feel scary and it had the potential to be creepy in a lot of different ways, it kind of comes off feeling silly, which is for a reason, and it makes sense why it's doing that. But as a horror book, that just like didn't create a super fun experience for me. It wasn't silly in a campy way. It was just silly in a silly way. So like I said, if you want to hear a lot more about this book, I'll have that video linked down below so you can go check out the book club discussion. Next up is a book that I gave a 2-star rating, and that is one of the most popular books of the year. I feel like I'm seeing this book everywhere. That is Yesteryear. I ended up listening to this one on audiobook through Libro FM because everyone's talking about it and I wanted to get on the buzz. I thought it sounded really interesting. This is being marketed as a sort of trad wife, ends up time traveling to the 1800s, having to live the real life that she's been advertising online kind of story, which sounds really hooky. That's a really good hook. It's really interesting. It's really timely. It makes sense why this book's so popular right now, but I didn't like it. And I feel like that's just what I'm going to say for all these books I didn't like this month. Is there's not even necessarily something so deep about it for each of these books. They just did not work for me. I just did not find this book interesting. I did not find it entertaining. I found it very boring, very slow paced, and ultimately uninteresting and disappointing by the ending. I'd also heard this book had a big twist, so I was like looking out for that, you know, wondering what's it going to be. And I'm not going to spoil what that is, but I really hated the nature of the twist. I think it kind of made the book fall flat on its face for me. A lot of other people are loving the twist. A lot of people are loving this book, but I am not. And I also feel a little bit weary because I've seen a large portion, at least like on the Threads universe on social media, people who aren't liking this book are talking about not liking it because of the portrayal of Christianity or the portrayal of trad wives or the portrayal of this main character as a villain rather than a victim of a system, and not finding her likable, and just like all these things that people are tearing apart online. Like, well, if you didn't like the book because of this, that's like defeating the purpose and whatever. And so I feel like if I'm like, oh, I didn't like this book, you're gonna think that it was because because of one of those reasons. It was not because of any of those reasons. I just didn't like the book. I did not like the writing. I thought it was going to be a story of deconstruction, I guess, is what I was going into it anticipating. Like, oh, this trad wife who thinks she's selling this lifestyle gets a slap in the face of reality when she has to go live it and realize how hard that is and be confronted with the patriarchy and, you know, all these things. That's not the type of story that it was, which caught me off guard in the beginning. Also, the whole idea of like time travel, really interesting to me, but so much of the book is just told through flashbacks of like how she got here. Not a lot's really happening in the 1800s storyline. She's not really doing a lot in that storyline. It's not really an interesting part of the story. It's like all the other stuff that got her to where she is. So like everything just kind of fell apart for me on this one. And I ended up giving it a 2-star rating, which I know is really unpopular. If you're interested in this book, still give it a chance. A lot of people are really loving it. I think it was just not what I was looking for. The other 2-star read I had this month was The Ending Writes Itself by Evelyn Clark, which was a bummer because I've been really interested in this. When this book first got announced and was being marketed, it was like this mysterious thing of, oh, these 2 authors who've been in the industry for a long time are coming together to write this isolated murder mystery full of writers on an island. It's going to be like a scathing critique of the industry while also being this interesting murder mystery. And it was a mystery who the 2 authors were. So it was just like a compelling moment when this first got announced. And there was all this speculation over who it might be. It turned out to be V.E. Schwab and Kat Clark. Yeah, Kat Clark. I've never heard of Kat Clark. I have heard of V.E. Schwab. I've read from V.E. Schwab. I've enjoyed books from V.E. Schwab before, but I'm not a huge reader of V.E. Schwab, so I don't have like this perception of their writing. I just enjoyed The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue quite a bit. And then honestly, that might be the only book I've finished so far. I have Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil on my shelves. I tried to pick it up when it first came out and it just wasn't hooking me right away, so I haven't gotten to it yet, but I do want to read that one. So I didn't have like a huge expectation of the book being from V.E. Schwab other than the fact that I know that's a well-loved author. This sounds like it's right up my alley. I love an isolated murder mystery. It's following all these writers who get invited to this island from this renowned author who's doing this sort of writing retreat competition sort of thing, having to complete this book. It all sounded like it'd be a good time. It unfortunately was super boring to me. I didn't like any of these characters, and I don't have to like my characters to like a story, but I didn't find them interesting. I wasn't liking that I wasn't liking them. I didn't care about what happened to any of them. They're all very like archetypal type of characters. It was really slow paced. It took a long time to get going. The writing's pretty dense for a murder mystery. And it was mostly just focused on the industry more than making an interesting murder mystery. It didn't really feel like a lot happened. It felt like they were just kind of like hanging around the house, not like actively doing a ton. And I really just found it to not be super memorable at the end of the day. Like it's not sticking in my mind. It just felt kind of generic. I don't know what Kat Clark writes, but V.E. Schwab does not usually write murder mysteries. So I don't know if this is just a case of like, they weren't as interested in the genre as they were in the things that they wanted to say about the industry in the book. But yeah, it just didn't stick out to me. Didn't have a great time with it. I feel like that is kind of the popular opinion with this book. I haven't been seeing as many people love this one. So yeah, gave it a 2-star. And then the one book that I enjoyed this month was Maddaddam by Margaret Atwood. This is the 3rd book in the Oryx and Crake trilogy. I think it's called the Maddaddam trilogy, actually. Starts with Oryx and Crake, ends with Maddaddam. It's called the Maddaddam trilogy. In case you haven't been following my journey with this series, I'll catch you up on my history with it. So I read the 2nd book in this trilogy when I was in college in an environmental literature course, and I really liked it. And I always wanted to go back and read the full trilogy. You can kind of read the 2nd as a standalone. So that's what we did in school, but I always wanted to go back and like read the whole series because I liked the 2nd book so much. So I started doing that a couple months ago, read the 1st book, Oryx and Crake, and I ended up giving it a 3-star rating. Then I reread the 2nd book, The Year of the Flood, and I gave that a 4-star rating, which I think is probably what I gave it the first time. Maybe I gave it a 5 back in the day, but I think it was probably a 4. And then Maddaddam, this one I gave a 3.5. So my overall stance on the series is somewhere between like a 3.5, 3.75 rating is what I would give the series as a whole. Margaret Atwood is a very, very skilled writer. The writing in these is just very good. She has a really good economy of words. She really creates a very vivid picture of this dystopian world and atmosphere. She examines it from different angles. She creates characters who feel super well-rounded and who carry the trilogy through different areas. But it's not your typical trilogy. Like if you hear dystopian trilogy, you're imagining like the young adult vibe probably of a particular person going on this like hero's journey where they're like an underdog, and then they go and they start to fight the world, and it gets bigger and bigger in each book. The challenges get bigger, the world gets bigger until ultimately they defeat the big bad in the end. That's not the type of trilogy this is. It's not telling a story like that at all. These are very character focused stories. They're very like quiet, dystopian type of world. A lot of the stories are told through flashbacks and storytelling of these characters' lives rather than being focused in the moment of the action. And so it's like character building and world, painting a picture of the world is what these books are doing. And I do find them pretty enjoyable. There were things I liked about this as a conclusion to the trilogy and things that I did not like so much as a conclusion to the trilogy. I think about these books as the first book being like the man's side of the story and the science world side of the story. What these books follow is this world where there was this waterless flood, like a cleansing of the world, organized by certain people for certain reasons after the world got in a disastrous place. It's kind of like a 5 minutes in the future glimpse of our world where climate change is just worse, the government is just worse, like everything's just a little bit worse than it is now, and it all comes into this big moment where this thing happens, and then following the aftermath of that. And there's several characters who are really central to the story for different reasons, and you're kind of seeing them get their backstories, you're seeing them intersect at different moments in time. Yeah, it's kind of like a weird series to describe. But the first book is like, here's what happened in the science world from the perspective of men, and this more like government kind of picture of what went on. The second book is more of a woman's story and more of a real people story, like just the people who are living out in the regular world and what the world was like for them and how they navigate through this. And then the third book is more fully in the aftermath of what's gone on with a combination of characters, mainly focused on telling the story of this one guy who's known as Maddaddam. And it felt a little bit strange to be revisiting his story at this point in the trilogy. It felt like it was recounting a lot of things we already knew. And I guess I'm just wondering why Margaret Atwood chose to make this his book. It's not fully his book. It's like his story told through him telling his story to another character who's kind of more central to the series. And I think the book examines a lot of really interesting concepts around just storytelling in general, like how important storytelling is to civilizations and recounting stories over time, and how recounting those stories can like shape the narrative of history and the change that will be in the world. Also concepts of like nature versus nurture. I don't want to necessarily spoil details of this book, but that tends to be a pretty big theme in the story. And so I think the framing of this being like hearing this guy's story as he's telling someone else the story and she's repackaging it for other people is just an interesting lens in general. But I do wonder why it was like him necessarily that they focused on in this book. And I wonder if some of it was like maybe a personal choice from just characters that she got interested in, because one of the main women characters in this story gets like a really happier kind of life in this book than she did in the previous books. And so I wonder if she just felt attached to that character and was like, I just want to give her happiness and explore that through a little bit of a romantic relationship going on in the book. I don't know, but there were things I liked about it, things that I was like, I wonder why we did that with this story. But ultimately I had a good enough time with it to give it the 3.5 star rating. So I'm satisfied with it as a conclusion to the trilogy. I do think there could be interesting ways to revisit this. She could do like a 20 years in the future following these other characters and keep this going. I don't know if she ever will, but I haven't read a ton from Margaret Atwood. I've only read these and The Handmaid's Tale, and then I've seen some adaptations of her work like Alias Grace, but she has written a ton. She is a very prolific writer, so there's plenty more for me to go out there and explore. So that's it for everything I read this month. Let me know down in the comments below if you've read any of these books and what you thought about them. But that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye!